The Grand Galactic Museum floated in silent space above the capital world of the Alliance. It was not built on a planet. It did not need gravity. It existed only to protect history. Inside it rested the most important object the galaxy had ever known, the sword. Every species called it something different, but the common name was simple, the first weapon. It was said to be older than the galaxy itself, older than stars, older than time as anyone understood it. No one knew where it came from. No one knew who made it. Every test showed the same impossible result. The blade existed before the universe reached its current form. The sword was black, smooth, and perfectly straight. It showed no rust, no cracks, no damage of any kind, not even after millions of years. It rested inside a crystal field, surrounded by 12-layered energy shields. Each shield was powered by a different civilization. No single species was trusted to guard it alone. Armed sentinels stood around the chamber at all times. Their weapons were always charged. Their orders were simple. No one touches a sword. Not scholars. Not admirals. Not council leaders. Only one being in galactic history had ever come close, and that had ended badly because of that moment. The museum had rules written in fear. On this day, the hall was full. Delegations from dozens of species stood in silence, staring at the blade. Some bowed. Some whispered prayers. Others simply watched, afraid to blink. The curator of the museum, an old and careful being, began his daily explanation. This relic, he said slowly, is believed to predate the formation of the galaxy. It has survived supernovae, dark age collapses, and reality fractures. It is not a weapon in the normal sense. It is unknown. The audience listened with respect. Then the human delegation entered the hall. Humans were still new to the Alliance. Strange, loud, emotional, dangerous in ways that made no sense. They had only joined recently, and many species still did not trust them. The humans walked without ceremony. No bowing, no prayers, no fear. At the front of the group was a human historian named Elias Ward. He was not tall, not armored, no visible weapons. He wore a simple dark coat and carried a small data pad. At first, he said nothing. Then he stopped walking. His eyes locked onto the sword. The guards noticed immediately. Weapons shifted. Energy fields tightened. The curator paused. Is there a problem, human? Elias stared at the blade for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was small, quiet. Then he laughed. The sound echoed through the hall. Every alien froze. No one had ever laughed in this chamber before. The curator's voice sharpened. Explain yourself. Elias stepped closer to the energy field. The guard shouted warnings, but he ignored them. He leaned forward, studying the sword like an old friend. That's wow, he said softly. Didn't expect to see this again. The curator bristled. You recognize it? Elias nodded slowly. Yeah, I do. A murmur spread through the hall. That is impossible, the curator said. No species alive remembers its origin. Elias looked confused. Origin? He tilted his head. You mean the manufacturing era? The hall went silent. The curator blinked. Manufacturing era? Elias tapped his data pad. Yeah, I mean its early model. Very early. Pre-stabilization design. You can tell by the edge geometry. He pointed casually at the blade. Several scholars gasped. You cannot possibly know that, one of them said. Elias shrugged. I've seen better versions. That was when the curator lost patience. This relic is sacred, he snapped. It is older than your species, older than most stars. It does not belong to you. Elias finally looked away from the sword. His expression was calm, almost amused. Actually, he said, that's where you're wrong. The guards raised their weapons fully now. Elias took a slow breath. That sword, he said clearly, is human. The room exploded in noise. Laughter, anger, shock. Several species shouted at once. The curator slammed his staff against the floor. Enough! Human! You are making a dangerous claim. Elias nodded. I know. You are saying your species created a weapon before the galaxy existed. the curator said. That is absurd. Elias smiled again, but this time there was something heavy behind it. No, he said. I'm saying that sword was made when the galaxy was still forming. The laughter stopped. Elias continued, his voice steady. And if that one is here, he added, then the others are missing. The curator's blood ran cold. The others? Elias looked back at the blade. That one, he said quietly, was an emergency tool. The hall fell into absolute silence. No one spoke. No one breathed. For the first time in millions of years, the galaxy felt something it had forgotten. Fear. For a long moment, no one spoke. The Grand Galactic Museum, once filled with whispers and movement, was now frozen in silence. The guards kept their weapons raised. Scholars stood stiff, afraid to move. The curator stared at the human, as if reality itself had cracked. You will repeat that. The curator said slowly, his voice tight, carefully. Elias Ward did not seem nervous. He lowered his hands and stepped back from the energy field. That sword is human-made, he said again, early human-made. The reaction was immediate. Several alien delegates laughed loudly. Others hissed in anger. A few stepped away, as if the human carried a disease. This is an insult, one scholar said. Humans are barely spacefaring children, said another. You expect us to believe you forged that before stars existed? The curator raised his staff again. Silence. The noise died down, but the disbelief remained. You will explain yourself, the curator demanded. Now. Elias nodded. Fair. He activated his datapad. A soft blue light spread into the air, forming a rotating image of the sword. Lines appeared across the blade, marking angles, layers, and internal structure. You see these markings? Elias asked. The scholars leaned in despite themselves. They're not decoration, Elias continued. They're stress flow channels, used to stabilize matter during high-energy collapse. One of the senior scientists stiffened. That design is theoretical. It was, Elias replied, before we tested it. The image shifted, showing a cross-section of the blade. Inside were layered materials no alien scanner had ever fully understood. The alloy is not natural, Elias said. It's artificial, built layer by layer to survive reality distortion. The curator's eyes narrowed. We have scanned it for millions of years. And you were looking for the wrong things, Elias said calmly. He tapped his pad again. This isn't a relic, he said. It's a tool. The word echoed through the chamber. A tool. The galaxy's greatest mystery, reduced to a simple word. You expect us to accept this without proof? The curator said. Elias nodded once. No, that's why we brought records. At his signal, another human stepped forward and placed a sealed data core on the floor. The seal was ancient, older than most civilizations. This archive, Elias said, was locked before your galaxy finished forming. The curator hesitated, then gestured to the museum systems. The data core opened. What appeared on the display made several aliens step back in shock. Images of space, but not the space they knew. Stars flickered and died in seconds. Space twisted. Entire regions collapsed into nothing. Physics itself looked unstable, broken, unfinished. This, Elias said quietly, was our environment. The curator whispered, impossible. We didn't call it the galaxy, Elias continued. We called it survival. The display shifted again. Humans, early humans, appeared. Not gods, not glowing beings, just people, wearing crude suits, building massive structures in collapsing space. They lived through this, a scholar whispered. They had to, Elias said. There was nowhere else. The sword appeared on the display, floating beside a human figure. That blade, Elias said, was issued during the emergency era. The curator turned sharply. Issued? Elias met his gaze. Standard deployment. That word hit harder than any weapon. Standard. You mean... The curator said slowly, this weapon was not unique? Elias shook his head. No, it was common. Several delegates staggered back. Then where are the others? Someone asked in a trembling voice. Elias hesitated for first time. That, he said, is a very good question. The curator felt something cold settle in his core. If there were more, he said carefully, and they are missing. Elias finished the sentence. Then someone moved them. The guard shifted uneasily. The curator looked back at the sword, seeing it differently now, not as a holy object, but as a forgotten tool left behind. You said it was an emergency weapon, the curator said. Yes, Elias replied. Emergency against what? Elias looked up at the stars beyond the museum walls, against a universe that wasn't finished yet. No one laughed now. No one argued. The curator straightened. If this is true, then your species predates galactic civilization. Elias nodded. By a lot. Then why? The curator asked. Did you never claim this relic before? Elias was silent for a moment. Because, he said, we didn't know you found it. That answer disturbed the room even more. You mean, a scholar said, you lost track of it? Elias smiled faintly. Yeah. The curator felt fear tighten around his thoughts. What kind of species loses weapons like this? He asked. Elias looked back at the sword one last time. The kind that stopped needing them, he said. Outside the museum, far beyond known space, something ancient stirred. And the galaxy, for first time, began to understand that the humans had not arrived to join history. They had returned to it. The Grand Galactic Museum was no longer just a place of history. It had become a place of fear. The curator ordered the hall sealed. No one was allowed to leave, not until the human records were fully examined. Council observers were summoned. Military channels opened across the Alliance. Elias Ward stood calmly as chaos spread around him. You understand, the curator said carefully, that if these records are false, this will be considered an act of aggression. Elias nodded. We expected that. The human archive continued to play. More images appeared, older than anything the galaxy had ever recorded. Space folded in on itself. Entire regions collapsed into dark nothing. Time itself seemed unstable, flowing forward and backward in broken waves. This was before the galactic age, Elias explained. Before stable stars, before safe physics. Alien scientists worked quickly, comparing the data to their own deepest records. The match was perfect. Too perfect. These events, one scientist whispered, they align with our earliest cosmic scars. The curator's hands trembled. You survived this, he said. Elias shook his head. No, we adapted. The display changed again. Human structures appeared. Vast frames of metal and energy anchored to nothing. People worked in teams, moving with purpose, not panic. They built in chaos. Another scholar said in disbelief. They had to, Elias replied. Waiting meant extinction. The archive zoomed in on the sword again. The blade was designed for a very specific threat. Elias said, not aliens, not creatures. Then what? The curator asked. Elias hesitated. Reality failure. The room fell quiet. When space collapsed, Elias continued. It created breaches, places where the universe tried to correct itself. The display showed monstrous distortions, shapes that did not belong to normal space. These were not alive, Elias said. They were errors. Errors that consumed matter, energy, time. They erased everything they touched. The curator felt sick. And the sword, he asked. It stabilized a breach, Elias said, by force. Alien engineers stared at the data. That level of control is impossible. One said. It was. Elias agreed. That's why we stopped using it. The curator looked sharply at him. Stopped. The sword worked, Elias said, but it damaged the universe. A ripple of shock passed through the room. You chose not to use your most powerful weapon, the curator said. Yes, Elias replied, because survival wasn't enough anymore. The display shifted to a new file, marked in red. Project Withdrawal. This was when the emergency era ended. Elias explained. The universe stabilized. The threats faded. And the weapons? The curator asked. Decommissioned, Elias said. Stored. Locked. Forgotten. The curator stared at the sword. You forgot this, he whispered. Elias nodded. One of many. That sentence broke something inside the room. If humans had dozens of such weapons, a council observer said slowly, then the balance of power was never balanced. Elias finished. A heavy silence followed. Then an alarm rang. Sharp. Urgent. Museum systems lit up red. What is that? The curator demanded. A technician shouted from the control ring. Deep space sensors just activated. A star map appeared, far beyond the edge of known space. Something massive moved, not toward the galaxy. Through it, the map glitched as entire regions went dark. One of the alien scientists whispered in terror. That pattern, it matches the old scars. Elias stared at the display, his face hard. So, he said quietly, they're back. The curator turned slowly. You recognize this threat? Yes, Elias replied. Is that what the sword was built for? Elias shook his head. No, he said. That's what it failed to stop. The galaxy's oldest fear had returned, and the museum's greatest relic was suddenly very, very small. The emergency lights inside the Grand Galactic Museum continued to flash. Red, slow, unforgiving. The star map still glowed in the center of the hall. Entire regions of space were fading into darkness, one after another. The shape of the spreading void was familiar to the oldest records. Too familiar. The curator turned toward Elias Ward. You said, the curator began carefully, that the sword failed to stop this threat. Yes, Elias replied. Then why? The curator asked. Does your species still exist? Elias looked at the image of the spreading darkness. Because, he said, we learned. The hall quieted. The curator gestured for the guards to lower their weapons. This was no longer a matter of security. It was a matter of survival. You must explain, the curator said. Everything. Elias nodded. All right. He activated his data pad again. The archive shifted to a new set of images. These were calmer, more controlled. Human cities appeared, floating in stable space, no longer fighting collapsing reality. This, Elias said, was the end of the emergency era. The curator studied the images. Your civilization looks peaceful. Yes, Elias replied. That's when we realized something important. The image zoomed in on the sword. That weapon solved problems, Elias said, but it created new ones. The scholars listened closely. When we used it, Elias continued, we forced reality to obey us. We cut through breaches, erased errors, and stabilized space. And, the curator asked, and the universe pushed back. Elias said, the display changed again. Scars appear across space. Thin at first, then wide. Regions where stars never formed. Places where time flowed. Strangely, our weapons fixed a moment, Elias said, but they damaged the future. A scholar whispered, you were hurting the universe. Yes, Elias said simply. The curator felt something heavy settle in his thoughts. So you stopped, he said. Yes. The word echoed through the chamber. You stopped using weapons that could save you, the curator said. Elias met his gaze. We chose a harder path. The display showed humans dismantling massive structures, weapons being sealed away, records locked behind encryption, so deep even humans struggle to access it later. We rebuilt our technology, Elias said, slower, cleaner, less violent. And the sword, the curator asked. Elias looked at the real blade inside its energy field. It was stored, he said, one of many. A council observer stepped forward. You abandoned power. Elias shook his head. No, we controlled it. The observer frowned. The galaxy would have worshipped such weapons. Elias gave a faint smile. That's why we hid them. The curator felt a chill. You knew other species would find them, he said. Yes, Elias answered. And you did nothing to stop it? Elias paused. We hoped you wouldn't need them. The star map pulsed again. Another region went dark. Hope, it seemed, had failed. A technician spoke with a shaking voice. The anomaly is accelerating. The curator looked back at Elias. If the sword failed before, why keep it all? Elias took a slow breath. Because it reminds us, he said, of who we were when we were afraid. The curator studied the human carefully. You're not afraid now, he said. Elias nodded. No, that answer frightened the room. Then why? The curator asked. Did you come here? Elias looked around the hall, at the guards, the scholars, the sword. Because, he said, this threat isn't ours alone anymore. The archive shifted again. New images appeared. Human ships, unlike any alien vessel. Sleek, silent, powerful without being loud. These, Elias said, are what replaced the sword. The curator stared. Those are not weapons. No, Elias said, they're solutions. Another council observer stepped forward. Can they stop the anomaly? Elias did not answer right away. They can contain it, he said carefully. The curator stiffened. Contain? Yes, Elias said, but not without help. Silence fell. You want the galaxy's cooperation, the curator said. Yes, Elias replied, because this time we won't break the universe to save it. The sword hummed softly inside its field, reacting to the growing distortion beyond the stars. The curator looked at it one last time. For millions of years, it had been the galaxy's greatest symbol of power. Now it felt like a warning. What happens? The curator asked quietly. If containment fails? Elias looked at the darkening map. Then, he said, we use weapons we never wanted to remember. The hall grew cold. Far beyond the museum, the ancient darkness moved closer, and the galaxy finally understood why humans had hidden their past, not out of weakness, but out of fear of what they might become again. The galaxy did not wait. The darkness spread faster than expected. Entire star systems went silent in hours. No explosions, no warning signals, just sudden emptiness, as if those places had never existed at all. Alien fleets rushed to respond. They failed. Weapons passed through the anomaly without effect. Energy beams bent and vanished. Missiles disappeared mid-flight. Ships that moved too close simply stopped existing. Panic followed. Worlds evacuated in chaos. Governments collapsed. Ancient alliances broke under fear. The Galactic Council declared a full extinction-level emergency. And still, the darkness advanced. Inside the Grand Galactic Museum, the sword began to react. It vibrated softly inside its energy field. Not loudly, not violently. Like something waking from a long sleep, the curator noticed first. The relic is responding, he said. Elias Ward stepped closer, his face serious. Yes, he replied. It can sense instability. The guards tensed. Is it activating? Elias shook his head. Not on its own. The curator swallowed. Then why does it feel like it's watching us? Elias did not answer. A council transmission cut through the hall. Human representative. The council leader said urgently, our fleets are failing. We request immediate assistance. Elias listened quietly. You promised containment, the leader continued. We are past that. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. Then he spoke. We warned you, he said calmly. Breaking the universe is not a solution. Then what is? The leader demanded. Elias looked at the sword. Endurance, he said, and patience. Another system vanished from the map. Patience, the galaxy realized, was running out. The curator stepped forward. If your modern technology cannot stop this, he said carefully, then perhaps the old one can. The hall went silent. You want us to use the sword, Elias said. Yes, the curator replied, even if it costs us. Elias stared at the blade for a long time. That weapon saved us once, he said slowly, but it nearly destroyed everything else. Then use it again, the curator said, or there will be nothing left to protect. Elias turned away. No, he said firmly. Not yet. Anger rippled through the chamber. Your caution will doom us, a council observer shouted. Elias turned back. his voice sharp now. No, he said, your fear already has. The anomaly surged. For the first time, it changed direction. It turned toward the capital world. Alarm screamed. The curator felt his strength leave him. It's coming here. Yes, Elias said. It knows where we are now. Then why won't you use the sword? The curator demanded. Elias activated his data pad one last time. The archive showed a final record, sealed deep in the rest. A human settlement, erased, not by the anomaly, but by the sword. Silence filled the hall. We won that battle, Elias said quietly, and lost everything else. The curator's voice broke. So we die instead? Elias looked up at the sword. No, he said. We remember. He turned to the human delegation. Signal the fleets, he ordered. Phase 1. Human ships moved. They did not charge. They did not fire. They formed a line. A wall. The darkness struck them and stopped. The galaxy watched in disbelief as the human ships held the anomaly in place, not destroying it, not cutting it, but slowing it. The cost was terrible. Human ships burned out, one by one, but none broke formation. The curator whispered, "Why would they do this?" Elias answered without looking away. Because, he said, this is what we chose instead of gods and weapons. The sword vibrated harder now, stronger, awake. The anomaly pushed again. Human lines began to fail. Elias reached toward the energy field. Prepare emergency access, he said quietly. The curator froze. You're going to use it. Elias nodded once. Yes, he said, but not the way it was meant to be used. The energy shields around the sword began to lower. Across the galaxy, every sensor spiked. Something ancient recognized something older. The first weapon was about to leave its prison, and the universe held its breath. The energy field around the sword faded layer by layer. The hum inside the Grand Galactic Museum grew deeper, heavier, like space itself was holding its breath. The blade lifted slowly from its resting place, untouched by any hand. Every sensor in the galaxy screamed at once, not in warning, in recognition. The curator could barely speak. It's responding. Elias Ward stood still. He did not reach for sword. It remembers, he said quietly. The sword rotated in the air, its black surface catching no light, bending space around it. Symbols appear along the blade, marks no alien had ever seen before. Human marks. Outside the museum, the human fleets were failing, one by one. Ships burned out as they held the darkness in place. The anomaly pushed harder, tearing against the barrier of human endurance. The council leader's voice cracked over the channel. Human line is collapsing. Elias closed his eyes for a brief moment. Good, he said. The curator stared at him. Good. Yes, Elias replied. It means the galaxy is watching. The sword pulsed once. The anomaly paused. For the first time since its return, it hesitated. Elias spoke not loudly, but clearly. His voice carried to the chamber and into Blade. You are not needed anymore, he said. The sword reacted instantly. It did not strike the anomaly. It changed it. Space around the darkness stabilized. The tearing edges smoothed. The consuming errors weakened, unable to feed. The curator realized the truth in horror and awe. You're not destroying it, he whispered. You're fixing the damage it caused. Elias nodded. That's what we learned. The sword was never meant to kill forever. It was meant to end emergencies. The anomaly began to shrink, not from force, but from lack of chaos. Human ships pulled back as the universe repaired itself around the wound. Across the galaxy, stars stopped vanishing. Silence returned. Then the sword dropped gently back into its field. The energy shields reactivated. Everything was over. For a long time, no one spoke. The curator finally turned to Elias. You could have erased it. Yes, Elias said, and broken everything else again. The council leader appeared on the display, shaken. You saved the galaxy. Elias shook his head. No, we reminded it how to heal. The museum staff replaced the plaque beneath the sword. The old words were removed. No more first weapon. No more divine relic. The new inscription was simple. Human emergency tool, early era. Status, retired. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. They were not conquerors. They were not gods. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who chose restraint. As the human delegation prepared to leave, the curator asked one final question. If this was an early tool, he said, what do humans use now? Elias paused at the doorway. He looked back at the sword one last time. We use trust, he said, and we try not to lose it. The doors closed. Far beyond the museum, the universe continued on, scarred but whole. And the galaxy finally understood the most terrifying truth of all. The strongest species was not the one that built the oldest weapon. It was the one that learned when to put it down.